Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I'm your host G1 as always. Hope you're having a good week. Been a very busy one for me. Setting up a merch store this week to thank you lovely listeners and followers. That's right, I'm selling t-shirts. There's 4 in the store right now with there'll be a few more to follow, at least as I get ideas to kind of put things together. And I'll look at some of the other products that Printify offers. They do a bunch of different things. And if I think there's stuff that you guys might be interested in, I'll put those in there as well. I will have a shirt for the website coming up. If you don't necessarily want the one that says WRSA Radio, maybe you want one for the website. I'm going to put one of those together, but I got to finalize all that with Concerned American before I put that one up. So just stand by on that if that might be something that you're looking for. Anyway, so good things are happening just in time for the world to end, apparently. if you believe all the pundits, we're in World War III, and it's just a matter of time before the end of everything happens. And while I am a very cynical guy, I also maintain a healthy dose of optimism, because things are more often than not as bad as people think they are, and generally they are not as good as people think they are either, but it's generally not as bad as some people, at least in our side of the camp, might see it as being. We generally ride somewhere in the middle with kind of ups and downs. So I'm going to continue to have low expectations all around, and I think I won't be disappointed all that much. Which kind of gets to the topic of the show today. What did you expect? Let's be real and ask yourself that question. What did you expect from the second Trump administration? I went in with low expectations because of 2 things. First, what we got in his first term: endless lawfare and inaction from Congress. The Republicans play the useless cucks for the first 2 years. They get nothing really done, nothing of any great substance done. They lose control in the midterms, and then we have 2 years of more nothingness, but fake hearings, flim-flam investigations. You went through this as well. I don't see any deviation from that. I see that pattern continuing. So second, a lesson that we also learned in the first administration: the swamp is wide and deep, and it's dark and murky. So it's not something you're going to fix all by yourself in short time frame. Anyone that thought that the president was going to go in and just wave a magic wand and, well, now he's got a second term, so he can just go in there and do what he wants. No, he wasn't. He's regardless of what his real motivations are, what he's really there for. There's a lot of speculation on our side of the block that, really he's Ziodon. He's in there to do everything that the Israelis want and all that. I'm not arguing that here nor there. Regardless, he's facing uphill battles on everything. He's got people in his own party that hate him or disagree with him or don't want to go along with him because they've got motivations being pulled from somewhere else. He certainly has people in the other party that hate him. The uniparty, they're all against him doing this, doing that, whatever. Everyone that he's put into place that isn't part of the uniparty is an outsider that isn't going to get anything done. So why did anybody have any expectations of anything really seriously changing? We all kind of held out a little bit. Well, maybe, just maybe. But in reality, we knew that wasn't going to happen. Now, case in point, this attack on Iran. And that's kind of the hot button item over the last week. And I've seen endless comments and opinions from all aspects of the spectrum. And that's a very appropriate word now that I look at it. But yeah, all areas of the spectrum for the last few days. And I think almost everyone is wrong. Wrong because they're only seeing the short term, and generally they're looking at it through the lens of how they felt about this administration and Trump in particular, prior to this attack happening. Now, I'm calling it an attack because that's what it is. It's not a war, at least within the bounds of the definition of that word that we've been using for the last 40 years. It's not a war per that set of criteria that the media has used to define that word. Almost every past president going back for decades have attacked someone, and it's not been called a war. It was a short-term action, limited goals, no ground operations, or at least very limited ground operations. We were in, we were out, we're done. That's not a war. Grenada wasn't a war. Panama wasn't a war. Those kinds of things. That's the criteria that we've used. So that's not a war, at least not yet, what we're doing in Iran. And I believe that set of conditions or that set of characteristics is how President Trump is using that word. He'll say, I didn't get us into a war because he didn't send ground troops in. That's his thinking. I think that's how he sees it. Well, I'm not committing to any kind of long-term operation here. I didn't put ground troops in, so it's not a war. I didn't get us in a war. Is that a truly accurate definition? I don't know. I could argue both sides of that, and I think people will do just that depending on which president is in office and if they agree with the action or not. So the haters, the people that don't like Trump, are going to say, no, he's getting us in a war, or they disagree with it. Oh, no, he's getting us in a war. And the people that are perfectly fine with it will say, no. Okay, I'm not being critical or approving of it in either way. I'm just using the term as the media has defined it and how it's politically been defined for several decades going back. So let's call it an operation in Iran or an attack on Iran. This operation has been something that factions within the swamp have been pushing for at least a decade, if not longer. Bibi Netanyahu has been to the White House multiple times over the last year trying to push Trump into this operation. Over and over, he's lobbied, and Trump finally gave in. Now, I suspect that there were threats that were involved there. We don't know the nature of those threats, but it could have been, look, if you don't do this, some more things, some more dirty, nasty things from the Epstein files might bubble up and appear. And it doesn't matter that they're fake because people will believe them. That kind of BS. Or it could, and I think it's more likely, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu would use that line with Donald Trump. I think he's more likely to use something that, who was it? Pollard, I believe it was, Jonathan Pollard, alleges that happened in the 6-Day War. I think he was the one that gave an interview in Israel, and he's a spy that was, put in jail and then released and sent back to Israel, that Mike Huckabee was meeting with a few months ago. Anyway, he gave an interview in Israel, and he says, well, back during the 6-Day War, when that kicked off, the U.S. said, no, we're not going to resupply you. We're not going to give you ammunition and all these kind of things. We're going to stay out of it. And so the Israelis threatened our ambassador. They told him, hey, tomorrow a plane is going to be setting out on a ramp at this specific airbase, and it's going to have something under the wing, and you should look at that aircraft with all of your cameras, all your spy equipment, all your people. And he said the plane was parked out there the next day with this thing under the wing, and the U.S. agreed to supply Israel after that. So basically he said that they put a nuke on a plane so that we could see it and confirm that Israel has nuclear capability, and that if we didn't supply them, they were going to use nukes in that conflict. So I think something like that is the kind of threat that Bibi made to Trump. If you don't do this with your conventional weapons, Israel will use its nuclear weapons. And I'm sure he's made some bullshit case that this was an existential threat to the existence of Israel, blah, 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 blah. And it has to be done and so forth. So Trump finally gives in and says, fine, we'll do it. We'll do it. We'll take care of this. Now let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Because is that weakness on Trump's part? Sure, you could make that argument. But let's look at this from a different situation, or a different side of it. How can this work to our advantage? Well, first, I don't believe that Trump is Ziodon, as some people call him on the right. I don't think he has any kind of religious Zionism kind of motivation at all. Trump looks for opportunity, and he knows that at times chaos creates opportunities. So he is an agent of chaos. He uses it to his advantage. I think he will deliberately do things that are unpredictable just to keep people guessing. I don't think he is like some calculating genius like his biggest MAGA followers think, but I think he lives more in the moment, and he doesn't really have these big, grand, long-term kinds of plans. He kind of moves from situation to situation, but he does think on a lot of different levels. He's just acting as the opportunities present themselves. And a lot of times this is a good thing. It works out for him, seems to work out for him a lot. Sometimes it's not. And he's just making sure that the good times outnumber the bad ones. And, do what you will with that look at or view of it. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't. That's kind of how I see it. So with that in mind, I think he's looking at this, or he might be looking at this as a way to solve some problems. Because if we do take down Iran, we destroy their leadership to the point that they're in disarray for a number of years, and we degrade their military to the point that it's no longer a credible threat to Israel, then Israel's kind of called in all of its favors with Trump. I did this for you. Now I'm done. Don't ask me again. And at the same time, what's happening to our weapon supplies? Well, we're not sending them to Ukraine, are we? In fact, Zelensky's been out this week complaining about that. Hey, don't forget about our little war over here, guys. So he kind of gets an off-ramp for that, too. Sorry, Zelensky, you know what? You got to take second back seat to us, because this is more important right now. We can't send you any more Patriots or bombs or missiles or whatever. So you might need to negotiate a peace deal with Russia that we've been telling you to negotiate and presenting to you, and you keep rejecting. So he gets that off-ramp that he's been looking for, and he fulfills whatever, and I'm using air quotes here, whatever obligation that he feels towards Israel, or Israel demands from us. So if it's done correctly, it's kind of a twofer. Now, the other upside to this is once again, we're showing the world that our latest generation aerospace and electronic warfare systems are basically untouchable. We have aircraft loitering over parts of Iran, just waiting for them to send out a missile launcher truck so that we can blow it up. It's been reported that even the elder statesmen, the old warhorse B-52s are being moved into place to sortie into Iran. And you don't send those guys into the skies if you think Iran still has a very capable air defense. We have air superiority. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran is still not dangerous. But they don't control their skies anymore. It's been hammered very hard. Their command and control has been hammered, so it's not functioning at a high level. Now, Iran has gotten their licks in. Like I said, they're still capable and still a worthy adversary. This was never going to be a cakewalk, and we were never going to come away from this with no losses or no casualties. The operation is going to cost us a lot of time and a lot of money, and it's already cost us some blood. That's why we should be far more careful with these kinds of decisions. But the very same thing that happened with Iraq in the early 90s, we demonstrated to the world, look, this is as dysfunctional as the United States is, and as dysfunctional as the United States military is, we do get a lot of bang for our buck that we spend on our hardware, and it's quite capable, and nobody else has anything that touches it in most areas. With very limited peers in the world, even the highly vaunted Chinese stuff is getting pancaked over there in Iran. So that's a demonstration that is worthy to make every once in a while. Now, I don't agree, however, with the operation overall, at least in some respects. I think Iran, I don't think Iran was just some innocent nation that never did anything to warrant this. I think they certainly have played their part and done things that warrant a heavy response to them. But I think it's very arrogant for the West to assert that other countries cannot have nuclear weapons. And in case you failed to notice, India and Pakistan and North Korea, they all have nukes, and they've not launched them in some kind of, just flagrant act of aggression. And there's no real reason to believe that Iran would do that either. India and Pakistan have had shooting wars, at least little dust-ups, and killed each other since they got nuclear weapons. So this idea that, Iran is going to get a nuclear weapon and suddenly become this hugely aggressive, violent, lashing out at everybody, they know the deal. They're going down that route to prevent what just happened to them. But this has always been about Israel being the dominant power in the region, and their push to eliminate everyone who stands in opposition to that. Nuclear weapons for Iran would have prevented that. And they have already started looking to their next opposition. The idea that Turkey is the next Iran is already starting to be floated around by their agents, their minions. Now, the interesting thing about that is Turkey is a NATO ally, and we have a rather important airbase in Turkey where we keep nuclear weapons. In Iran, last night or sometime yesterday, this morning, it was over the last, 15, 20 hours, they fired missiles at the U.S. airbase there in Turkey. And those missiles were intercepted, but Turkey was not happy with that at all. It may be a good time for Trump to remind the world that Turkey is a NATO ally, and that if they are attacked by anyone, then it is an attack on NATO, and there would be a response. It's kind of a subtle way to tell the Israelis that idea of Turkey being next on the list is DOA. But that's probably not going to happen, because we all know that Israel gets its way eventually. If it's not with Trump, it'll be with the next administration. It's funny how that is. How many people are so willing to sell out their country for a small group of people in the desert who have literally nothing to offer anyone? They literally are a net drain on the world. The Saudis and the other Gulf states, they at least have oil. We may not see eye to eye on their religious and all of their customs and things like that, but they got oil. They offer something. What does Israel do for anyone except spread death and destruction and undermine the lives and livelihood of people in the Western world in almost every aspect? They don't export anything that anyone really needs from them, nothing that we can't get from somebody else. And they take billions of dollars in U.S. foreign aid and use it to prop up their social safety net. We pay the retirement for wealthy Israelis. And we get nothing in return for that. They're literally the friend that wants to go out to the bar every Friday night, and when you get there, they tell you that you have to buy their drinks because they forgot their wallet. Oh, and then they get you into a fist fight with everybody in the place and get you thrown out. Yeah, great friend, right? Why do we hang out with people like that? I like the Iranian people. One of my mentors was a Persian. He was a VP at my company, and I worked directly for him for a number of years. He taught me more than I could ever thank him for. A great man. I respect the hell out of him. I respect their people, their culture, which has been around for thousands of years. I don't like the government of Iran. They talk this big game and they pretend that they are a serious player, a major player, but in reality, they're bumbling fools. For example, their strategy for this conflict is to decentralize their command and control, which, as we saw, that we've been smashing their control centers and locations, so not a bad idea, okay? But it's seemingly resulted in a completely uncoordinated, half-baked response to these attacks. In the last attack, they focused firing their missiles and drones at Israel. And I believe that is what ended the attack sooner than when it might have otherwise. Israel could not continue to take that kind of punishment. Their people were getting hammered in their apartment buildings. Okay, this time they're just shooting at everybody, trying to cause widespread economic disruption. And I think that given the circumstances and given the game that is at play, this is a stupid strategy. This is a game of attrition. Drones and missiles are the weapons, so you can keep launching those as long as you can produce them. But there are limitations. You only have so many launchers for those missiles. You could make the argument that more investment in drones and a heavier deployment of drones and use of drones would be a far better strategy or far better use of the money than concentrating it into these very expensive missiles. But at any rate, you only have so many launchers for the missiles, and you can't replace those launchers very quickly. So every time one of them gets blown to bits, you are losing capability, because it doesn't matter how many missiles that you have. If they're just sitting in an underground shelter, they're worthless because their launchers are dead. And every time you even drive something that looks like a launcher around, it gets pancaked. So those missiles are worthless. Drones are a little bit of a different story. You don't need a lot of special gear to launch them, so you can fight the attrition game a little bit better. But the problem with the drones is they don't deliver a very big punch. So you're going to get to the point that you run out of your larger systems, your larger hitting systems. It's just a matter of time. And I think that they should have focused on hitting Israel and played up to their neighbors this larger regional conflict. Called for them to join in the attack, or at least put pressure on them to restrain the U.S. from using their bases in those countries, which is pretty much what they did during the last rounds of attacks, that the U.S. finally steps in and goes at and bombs some of their big, nuclear sites. I think if they had stayed with that strategy and just focused on Israel, that they would have brought this to an end much sooner. We'll see, how this all plays out for them. It just seems to me to be just kind of fruitless efforts and spending of resources for what they could be a long-term goal. It's going to take time for these economic repercussions to start playing out. So that's a longer-term goal, and you probably aren't even going to be around to see that all play out. This regime could collapse in very short order. at any moment. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll stick around. Maybe they're resilient enough to stay in power. But very quickly, you could get to a point where everything comes out from underneath you, and you're not around to see a long-term economic strategy play out. Anyway, we'll see how it works for them, and we'll keep talking about it while it's going on. That is all I have time for this week. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab, Nice Crew, and the Mothership. Follow the link in the description to the merch store, and I will see you on the next episode.